Okay, who brought the dog?
Ghostbusters wasn't another comedy. It was a supernatural risk that almost suffocated in its own slime. What began as a speculative notion on the page became one of the most memorable cultural touchstones of the 1980s, but getting there was madness baked into every shot. The Marshmallow Man nearly sunk the film. The Ectomobile came close to imploding before it even moved, and Huey Lewis pulled the theme song into court. Behind the proton packs, behind the one-liners, was a tale of invention, ad-libbing heartache, and sheer lunacy. This isn't a story about ghosts. It's about how one crazy idea became a blockbuster exorcism in New York and took over the world with a trail of destruction. To get a sense of Ghostbusters, you need to get down in the slime and the scramble that spawned it. And it all started with Dan Aykroyd's craziest idea. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Star Vault TV, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. When Aykroyd originally sat down to write, Ghostbusters wasn't even on Earth. His first draft didn't start in New York, it started in the universe. Aykroyd's script envisioned ghost hunters as interdimensional warriors, buckling on helmets, firing proton packs through wormholes, and pursuing spirits through space and time. Whole planets were haunted, whole universes required rescue. It wasn't merely a comedy, it was a space epic that dwarfed Star Wars. But Hollywood in 1982 wasn't prepared for that. There wasn't the technology, and the budget would have exploded into hundreds of millions of dollars. The studios hesitated, the project was impossible, and Ghostbusters was dead before it could be born. Then Harold Ramis and director Ivan Reitman arrived, and they assisted Aykroyd to rein in the insanity into something realistic. Rather than galaxies, there was one unit. Rather than infinite worlds, there was one city. Outer space was exchanged for New York, skyscrapers took over as the fortresses, and the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, once one of numerous cosmic horrors, got reduced to one monstrous figure smashing through Manhattan. By reducing it, they didn't dilute the story, they honed it. Ghostbusters became gritty, snappy, and brimming with comedic bite. From discarded galaxies arose a New York comedy that would dominate the world. But for Aykroyd, the film was never simply about ghosts. It was about loss, friendship, and family. From the outset, he could not envision Ghostbusters without John Belushi. He envisioned his Blues Brothers collaborator as the sheer wild ghost hunter. Messy, unstable, funny, and brimming with manic energy. Belushi was meant to be at the center of the mayhem. But tragedy intervened before the fantasy could materialize. In March 1982, Belushi died of a drug overdose at just 33. Aykroyd was shattered. That grief never left the movie, and it seeped into the character of Slimer. When the effects team began designing the Green Ghoul, Aykroyd told them to channel Belushi's spirit. Slimer's sloppy grin, endless appetite, and chaotic energy were all built as a tribute to Belushi. On location, Aykroyd even called him the Belushi Ghost. Belushi passed away before he could buckle into a proton pack, but in a sense, he lived on in one of film's most bizarre memorials, a ghost who would never leave the party. Casting didn't become any simpler from there. Winston Zeddemore was one of Aykroyd's most audacious concepts. In his initial scripts, Winston wasn't simply a tag-along, he was a decorated Air Force demolition expert replete with history and heft, and equal to Venkman, Ray, and Egon. The character was developed specifically for Eddie Murphy, whose star was rapidly ascending, and whose charm could easily have elevated Winston to become one of the most popular Ghostbusters. But Murphy turned it down for Beverly Hills Cop, and the script was cut. Winston's rich introduction was eliminated, his lines were cut, and his entrance was postponed until well into the film. Ernie Hudson, who signed on believing he had gotten a role of a lifetime, was devastated when his character was cut out. Yet Hudson kept the film grounded, bringing heart and credibility. But history can't help but ask what might have been. Ghostbusters was the story of 3 stars and one Ghostbuster who got shortchanged. And then there was Sigourney Weaver. When she came in to audition for Dana Barrett, she didn't read the lines. She fell to the ground, growled, and flailed her body into one of Gozer's horror dogs. The casting room was shocked. Ivan Reitman was taken aback, half astonished, half frightened. Weaver wasn't auditioning, she was possessed. It was strange, it was daring, and it was just what the film required. Fresh from Alien, she had toughness, vulnerability, and a charismatic presence that allowed her to stand up to Murray's merciless improvisation and the mayhem of demons and gods. That single scaring audition transformed her from contender to perfect fit, the human heart within a world infested with ghosts. If Weaver was dependable, Bill Murray was his antithesis. Contracts were what the studio desired, but Murray dismissed them with a shoulder. Instead, he made a verbal commitment. He'd work Ghostbusters if Columbia Pictures would finance his love project, The Razor's Edge. And then he disappeared to France, making Reitman sweat weeks in advance of shooting. Would Murray report for work at all? The studio prepared for its eventual downfall. And then, on day one, Murray ambled onto set as if he'd been along for the ride all along. No contract, no promises, just a smile and a never-ending flow of improvisation. Columbia had wagered millions on a handshake, and miraculously, it paid off. Murray gave one of the greatest comedic performances of all time without ever putting pen to paper. And if Murray was mercurial, the studio was antagonistic. In 1983, Columbia committed to financing Ghostbusters for $30 million. But as production was about to start, Columbia was taken over by Coca-Cola. The soda bosses couldn't believe they had just inherited a speculative $30 million ghost hunting comedy about New York. Some wanted to cancel it straight away. Ghostbusters teetered for weeks on the brink. Reitman and Aykroyd fought tooth and nail, determined not to let the movie be killed. Had Coke prevailed, Ghostbusters would never have gotten beyond development. Coke almost killed what turned out to be one of the most lucrative franchises of the decade in a twist of irony. And then there was the Marshmallow Man. Reitman initially was afraid the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man would kill the movie. The monster wasn't CGI, but a stuntman wearing a $20,000 foam suit trampling through dollhouse-sized New York miniatures. Each building needed to be rigged with explosives and torn down in a single shot, because once destroyed, it could never be rebuilt. 3 suits were constructed, and all 3 were demolished during production. Reitman sat in fright at the initial test screening, certain that the audience would laugh at the wrong moment. Instead, they screamed at the ghost in the library, then cheered when Stay Puft showed up. What Reitman was afraid would be the film's weakness ended up being its crown jewel, a monster both frightening and ridiculous, forever etched in pop culture. The mayhem of New York itself became one with the movie's personality. Shooting at 55 Central Park West, the building where Dana Barrett lived, closed-off streets caused traffic jams and made locals mad. One very irate bystander made his way onto set, science fiction icon Isaac Asimov. Furious at the disruption, he was calmed only when Aykroyd, an enormous fan, gushed about his books until Asimov cracked a smile. That blend of New York's chaos and charm became part of the film's DNA. This wasn't a comedy built in a backlit, it was alive in the beating heart of Manhattan. And speaking of chaos, the studio almost cut the very first scare, the ghost in the New York Public Library. Executives found it too scary for a comedy, and worried families would leave the theater before the gag started. Reitman struggled to retain it. He knew the film required that shot of fear so that the ghosts could be palpable. He was correct. That initial fright provided the tone, demonstrating that Ghostbusters was something more than a silly comedy. It was terror and humor intersecting in the same moment. Even the title was a fight. Ghostbusters wasn't available for Columbia to use. Filmation had already purchased the name due to a goofy 1970s children's television series that featured ghost hunters and a gorilla. Columbia scrambled, shooting entire scenes with placeholders such as Ghost Smashers and Ghost Breakers, hoping they might be able to secure the rights. They made a deal at the very last minute with Filmation, paying for the title. Ghostbusters was rescued. Ironically, when the animated spin-off premiered in 1986, Columbia was forced to title it The Real Ghostbusters, a tongue-in-cheek nod to how close they were to losing the ideal title. And what of the Ectomobile? Aykroyd had initially envisioned a strange black ambulance with purple lights, horns, and carnival-like gizmos. It was just too absurd, and the plan was ditched for a grimy 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteor ambulance, painted white, and equipped with ladders and cryptic gadgetry. It was salvaged, hackneyed, and yet legendary. The issue? It wouldn't move for long. Despite two models being constructed, both broke down on a regular basis. Mechanics were working around the clock just to get the car rolling for a shot. By its last day of service, it was being kept together by chance rather than metal. But when it screamed across the Manhattan Bridge, sirening, it became